It's not about grabbing more land. Russia doesn't need land. It's about extermination of Ukraine as a state. It's about subjugation of Ukraine and turning it into a springboard to continue further to the West and trying to reestablish hegemony in Europe.
We're going to be talking now about Ukraine because there was that flurry of diplomacy last weekend. There was apparent progress towards peace, but that does appear to have stalled. Yesterday, Russia seemed to attack an American electronics company in Ukraine, yet another sign that Vladimir Putin has no intention of ending the war. So what pressure can be put on him? Meanwhile, Ukrainian soldiers continue to die on the battlefield and civilians live under nightly bombardments and are then forced to answer questions about what they are willing to give up. Russian exiled dissident Mikhail Khodorkovsky, speaking to Times Radio, suggested ceding the Donbass was not that big a concession.
A few dozens or even few hundreds square kilometers. It's not so important. Much important is security. Security for remain part of Ukraine.
Well, joining me on the line now is Jim O'Brien, who served as head of the US Office of Sanctions Coordination under the Biden administration at the start of the conflict in 2022, and Alexander Mereshko, chair of the Ukrainian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. Good evening to you both.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, both of you. Jim, let me start with you because there's been so much talk of sanctions. You know, Donald Trump promised sanctions a few weeks ago. They didn't materialise. You know, now there's pressure on him to actually give up, do those sanctions as he's long threatened. But let's just talk about exactly what kind of sanctions would work and have worked in the past.
Yeah. So I think the backdrop here, as you say, is this flurry of diplomatic activity. And the key to success is that Russia has to realize it cannot win and that its horizon is shrinking. So how do you get to that point? Some of the answer is military. Some of it is Ukraine making a good proposal for a ceasefire. And President Zelensky did that last August. So we're set up now, and President Putin needs to feel pain. So two things could be very useful. You have to get at his ready cash. He started the war with $640 billion of reserves. He now has a little over $100 billion, most of it in gold and renminbi. About $300 billion is being held by European central banks, and that money should be made available to Ukraine. That will pay for several years of battlefield costs. The second thing is to get at his oil revenue. That's what pays for the war. And here, Europe and the UK have started to do a good job of shutting down the ships that carry the oil. That's the direct way to drive up his costs and take away his money.
Just be a bit more specific about the oil sanctions that the US could, because we've got this package of measures that is sort of ready to go in the US Congress. Is that right?
Yeah, the U.S., those measures would be good. I don't expect those to move. It's interesting that Senator Graham talks about these measures, and he did that, I think, to point President Trump in the right direction. But to this point, Donald Trump has shown no inclination that he wants to increase pressure on President Putin. That means it's up to the European partners in Ukraine to take the next step.
Right. OK, well, let me bring in Alexander Mereshko now. I'll come back to you in a second, Jim. Alexander, given that you don't expect any sort of really meaningful sanctions from Donald Trump, what would you like to see the Europeans doing if you could respond to what Jim has just said?
Well, first of all, I completely agree, because the goal is that Putin shouldn't have the slightest hope that he can win war against Ukraine. And our goal for all kinds of sanctions is to paralyze Russian war machine, to stop it from receiving revenues, and at the same time to enhance defensive capabilities of Ukraine. How it can be done? First of all, I still don't lose hope that someday President Trump will do the right thing and will impose sanctions as he had promised before. But in the meantime, what can be done by our European allies, our friends, is first of all, not only to freeze Russian sovereign assets, it's around 300 billion euros, but also confiscate them and to give this money to Ukraine. I also believe that we need to at least freeze assets of Russian oligarchs because, they also contribute to Russian war machine.
Jim, let me bring you back in because there is always this kind of Russian propaganda, isn't there, that Russia is being unfairly targeted and demonized by the West. Would applying sanctions be grist to Putin's mill on that?
Maybe he shouldn't invade a neighboring country repeatedly if he cares about his reputation. He hurt his reputation further by threatening to use nuclear weapons and by denying grain from Ukraine to get to global markets. So he's got his own problems. No, there's no one in the world believes that Russia is unfairly demonized. Some countries have interests with Russia and don't want to shout that from rooftops. But no, this is a stupid position.
And you said there's no prospect of Donald Trump issuing these sanctions, pushing through these sanctions that are on the table in Congress. But he is coming under some pressure from his own side on this, isn't he? So is that, could he move?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I think the more likely motivation is that Putin is embarrassing him. Donald Trump is in a hurry to claim that he has settled 6 or 7 conflicts. I mean, he hasn't, and he wants to add this to the list. So he needs an announcement. He announced first a ceasefire, and Putin rejected that. Zelensky's accepted. He announced a trilateral meeting, and Putin has rejected any meeting with Zelensky. So now Trump is left with an offer from Ukraine to buy American weapons, something Trump likes, and Putin embarrassing him publicly. I think that's the most likely thing that might move him to try something different.
Alexander Marshko?
Yeah, first of all, we hope that this bill initiated by Senator Lindsey Graham will go forward. But, I suspect that a lot depends on the Trump's position. And if he gives a green light, it can go ahead. And I do hope that it will happen. But again, the picture looks kind of a little bit strange because Ukraine has agreed to all ceasefire initiatives by President Trump, even though it's not always in our best interests. Putin has rejected in a very humiliating way for President Trump, maybe in an attempt to sort of show his weakness as a political leader. I don't know. But, the moment has come long ago that President Trump should demonstrate resolve and to follow through on his previous promises.
Well, Alexander, you once nominated Donald Trump for a Peace Prize. After what happened in Alaska, have you got to admit that really everything has gone Putin's way since then? And the kind of hope that some kind of peace might come out of that has been rather naive, really.
Well, interesting thing that when Mr. Trump is doing something positive for Ukraine, for example, when he's talking about possible engagement of the United States when it comes to security guarantees, I rejoice, and it's a good sign. But unfortunately, I don't see always kind of consistency on his part. I still believe that the United States and President Trump personally, I would like him to receive Nobel Peace Prize for his success in bringing stable, just, sustainable peace to Ukraine. And he can do it, I honestly believe. But we need more political will on his part to do that.
And when you hear Mikhail Khodorkovsky, former Russian political prisoner and oligarch, saying, well, it's not much land that Ukraine's been pressed to give up, what do you make of that?
Well, of course, and Russians themselves, for example, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, he was himself outspoken about this, that it's not Russian aggression against Ukraine. It's not about grabbing more land. Russia doesn't need land. It's about extermination of Ukraine as a state. It's about subjugation of Ukraine and turning it into a springboard to continue further to the West and trying to reestablish hegemony in Europe.
Jim, Gina Bennett, former CIA analyst. Oh dear, it's obviously Friday evening. I can't get my words out. Apologies for that. She told us earlier on the programme that the way Trump handled Putin in Alaska was very much like Trump was a kind of Kremlin asset. I mean, that's been long sort of joked about in a way. It's quite a dark sense of humour. But what do you think is going on here in Trump's head about how he's approaching the Kremlin?
It's a stature game. I'm not going to speculate about him being compromised or other. That's for other people. But since the 80s, Trump has believed that his path to global fame and riches has been to do deals with Moscow. He started this administration wanting commercial deals with Moscow. And the most effective thing that the UK and EU have done is to deny him those things by shutting off Russian gas exports, the natural gas pipelines, and clamping down on the oil. And they need to go further on critical minerals and other steps, because that gets at the motivation Trump feels to treat Putin in the way that he does. And that might leave him free to do the right thing, which is to show Putin that he can't win.
Alexander, today we heard from Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General. He was in Ukraine. He's showing solidarity. Again, warm words, photo opportunities. But this security guarantee that the US is promising, it's very woolly still, isn't it?
Well, the only reliable security guarantee remains the same: NATO membership for Ukraine. It's the only thing which can deter and can stop Putin. Unfortunately, I don't know about other alternative security guarantees, how effective they are. In terms of Putin's mind, NATO membership is the only thing which can stop him.
Jim O'Brien, Alexander Mareshko, thank you both very much for joining us. Very interesting to hear your thoughts on that.